I'm reading now the prologue of Going to Tehran, Why America Must Accept the Islamic Republic of Iran by Flint Lawrence Leverett and Hilary Mann Leverett. It has an introduction and a prologue. This was published in 2013. In the more than 30 years since the Iranian Revolution, Western analysts have routinely depicted the Islamic Republic as an immature, ideologically driven polity incapable of thinking about its foreign policy in terms of national interests. From this Western and especially American perspective, the Islamic Republic displayed its fanatical character early on, first in the hostage crisis of 1979 to 1981, and shortly afterward with the deployment of teenage soldiers in human wave attacks against Iraqi forces during the 1980s. Supposedly, the same Shia cult of martyrdom and indifference to casualties that fueled those tactics persist in a deep attachment to suicide terrorism, and would, if the Islamic Republic acquired nuclear weapons, render it undeterrable. By Western standards, a rational cost-benefit calculation. Allegations of the government's irrationality are inevitably linked to assertions that it is out to export its revolution across the Middle East by force, is hell-bent on the destruction of Israel, and is too dependent on anti-Americanism for its domestic legitimacy to contemplate improving relations with the United States. Images of the Islamic Republic as the epitome of an irrationally radical state are often conveyed through analogies with the 20th century's most criminal regimes. Some, including former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, former Speaker of the House of Representatives Newt Gingrich, and a host of current and former Israeli officials, among them Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, have compared the Islamic Republic to Nazi Germany, arguing that it's 1938 and Iran is Germany, and what Iran is trying to do right now is not far at all from what Hitler did to the Jewish people just 65 years ago. According to Walter Russell Mead, a prominent historian of American foreign policy who ought to be above misplaced incendiary analogies, it's a legitimate argument and subject for discussion about whether the Iranians are jerks like Franco who will settle down to peacefully hang homosexuals and torture dissidents at home if left to themselves, or whether they are megalomaniacal nutcases who will interpret our forbearance as weakness. If we let them have Czechoslovakia, they will start reaching for Poland. The Wall Street Journal's Bret Stephens has compared the Islamic Republic to Japan of the 1930s and World War II, another martyrdom-obsessed non-Western culture with global ambitions. Karim Sajipour of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace has looked to the Soviet Union for parallels, arguing that the Islamic Republic is a corrupt, inefficient, authoritarian regime with a bankrupt ideology whose leaders, like the men who once ruled Moscow, derive their internal legitimacy from thumbing their noses at Uncle Sam. Even more extreme is the racially tinged rhetoric about mad mullahs conspiratorially chuckling behind their beards as they work to acquire nuclear weapons, which they and or Mohammed Ahmadinejad, Iran's millenarian lay president, will use to attack Israel, the United States, and other enemies of Islam. Bernard Lewis and his neoconservative acolytes have asserted that Ahmadinejad and or the mullahs would launch such an attack, making the Islamic Republic, in effect, history's first suicide nation to hasten the reappearance of the Mahdi, or 12th Imam, thus setting the stage for God's final judgment and a more conclusive end of history than Francis Fukuyama ever imagined. No. As with the last recording, I'll feel free to interject my own editorializing, which is that, oh, the irony of this. Because here we are now in the United States reflecting on how it's the Israelis' end of days imperative and scenario, the Samson option, and the United States perceiving this as being the coming of, the second coming of Christ or some bullshit. So the religious extremism is coming from the United States and Israel, not Iran. In 2006, Lewis even identified a religiously significant date, August 22nd, which that year corresponded to the 27th day of the Islamic month of Rajab, when Muslims commemorate Laylat al-Ma'ath, the night of appointment, when the Prophet Muhammad was launched on his prophetic mission, as the time Iran might detonate its first nuclear weapon. As Ahmadinejad himself has mockingly noted, many Americans seem to think that Iranians are all sitting in the desert, turned toward Mecca, waiting to die. This is my editorializing. I think too many Americans in the United States are victims to the grifting of the commodification of religion that is too often done within sects of Christianity, and I would say pseudo-sects of Christianity. Many people, these people obsessed with the rapture, are doing this very thing here in the United States. The veteran diplomat Chas Freeman points out that to dismiss a foreign government, policy, or circumstance as irrational is to confess that one does not understand its motivations, causes, or calculus, has no idea how to deal with it, short of the use of force, and has no intention of making the effort to discover how to do so. If American political and policy elites were to make such an effort, they would discover that the Islamic Republic has shown itself to be a highly rational actor in the conduct of its foreign policy. The Iranian government did not launch an ideologically motivated holy war against Iraq in the 1980s. Rather, it struggled to defend the Iranian people against a brutal Iraqi invasion that was directly supported by many of Iran's neighbors, as well as by Western powers, including the United States. When in the course of that war, Iran was subjected to years of chemical attacks, Grand Ayatollah Khomeini, the Islamic Republic's founding father, and his associates chose not to weaponize Iran's stockpile of chemical agents, a move that would have enabled it to respond in kind. And for years now, the Islamic Republic's highest political and religious authorities have rejected the acquisition and use of nuclear weapons, both on strategic grounds and because, in their view, nuclear weapons violate Islamic morality. We know what it means to drop nuclear weapons on people. The United States it's the only country that's done it twice. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was not the reason why World War II ended. It was a hideous experiment of war and military might. Tehran's support for terrorism is another essential theme in Western narratives. Yet the most comprehensive database study of suicide terrorism carried out to date determined that there has never been an Iranian suicide bomber. Iranian support for paramilitary groups that the United States considered terrorist organizations or threats to American forces, Hezbollah, Hamas, Shia militants in Iraq, has been focused on theaters where the United States, Israel, and Sunni states allied to Washington are seeking to undermine important Iranian interests. For years after 9/11, some neoconservatives claimed that Osama bin Laden was living in luxury in Iran, an assertion elaborated by a 2010 documentary, quote-unquote, that was extensively touted on Fox News. The allegation was picked up by more centrist journalists like ABC's George Stephanopoulos, who pushed Ahmadinejad in an interview to say whether the Islamic Republic was in fact harboring bin Laden. Ahmadinejad retorted, "I heard that he was in Washington, D.C." Beyond the demonstrated absurdity of the claim, public statements by al-Qaeda leaders, as well as documents captured by American special forces from Osama bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, in May 2011, show that the relationship between al-Qaeda and the Islamic Republic has been deeply antagonistic. If Westerners looked soberly at the record, they would discover that Iran is not aggressively exporting its revolution. It is true that in the years immediately following the Shah's overthrow, exporting the revolution was proclaimed as a principle of Iranian foreign policy by Khomeini himself. But what did this principle mean? Should the Islamic Republic actively work to replicate its revolution elsewhere, disregarding international norms of sovereignty and non-interference in other states' internal affairs? Or should it concentrate on making itself an exemplary model of Islamic governance from which other states might draw inspiration? In the decade between the revolution and his death, Khomeini made statements that seemed to support both positions. But the post-revolutionary constitution, in which the phrase exporting the revolution never appears, notes that the Islamic Republic must scrupulously refrain from all forms of aggressive intervention in the internal affairs of other nations. Moreover, all the major figures in the first generation of Iran's post-Khomeini leadership, including Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khomeini, who succeeded Khomeini as supreme leader, and Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, the first president elected after Khomeini's death, clearly committed to the exemplarist approach. Early in his tenure as supreme leader, Khomeini declared that the Islamic Revolution of Iran has taken place and was simultaneously exported throughout the world. The revolution was exported once, and that is the end of the story. Throughout its more than 2 decades in power, this has been a firm precept guiding Iranian policy. Likewise, the Islamic Republic is not out to destroy Israel. One of the more pernicious legends about Ahmadinejad is that he threatened to do so, a claim now so entrenched in mainstream Western discourse as to be a social fact. But the claim is false, as Israel's intelligence minister later admitted. It is based on a poor translation of a speech Ahmadinejad delivered on October 2005, shortly after he became president, and was given international currency by journalistically irresponsible articles in the New York Times and other outlets. These accounts depict Ahmadinejad declaring that Israel must be wiped off the map, evoking a Nazi-like campaign to exterminate the Jewish state and its people. Consider, though, what Ahmadinejad actually said in Farsi. He cited Khomeini's statement that, I will not try to pronounce this. I'd have to practice sounding it out. Literally, that this regime occupying Jerusalem must disappear from the page of time. Yes, the regime. For those who insist on conflating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, this may seem a disassociation without a difference. But there's no threat to destroy Israel in the sentence or anywhere else in the speech. Later, Ahmadinejad analogizes the eventual disappearance from the page of time of the regime in Israel to the collapse of the Soviet system, a result of internal failures, not external aggression. Tehran's objective is to contain what Iranian leaders since Khomeini have seen as Israel's ambitions to weaken and subordinate its Muslim neighbors. Well, that's undeniable. Iranian policymakers take a long view of their standoff with Israel, expecting that the unsustainability of apartheid-like political arrangements in the 21st century will lead to the fall of Israel's current political structure, not the annihilation of its Jewish population. Such a scenario is disturbing to Israelis and Israel supporters, but it does not entail an Iranian threat to liquidate the Jewish state or its Jewish inhabitants. Recently, Ahmadinejad has attracted additional rounds of Western criticism over his description of Israel as an insult to humanity. However, the phrase, which has been used by other Iranian leaders as well, is taken word for word from innumerable statements by UN bodies dating back to the 1960s criticizing South Africa's apartheid system. It is language of moral condemnation, not a physical threat. In evaluating statements about Israel from Ahmadinejad, Ayatollah Khomeini, or any other Iranian official, Westerners would do well to consider that from Tehran's perspective, Israel is effectively at war with the Islamic Republic. Israel's officials regularly threaten to use military force against Iran, and Iranians know that Israel is sponsoring a wide range of covert actions against their country, including assassinations of its scientists and lethal terrorist bombings. Westerners might also recall that before Anwar Sadat was hailed as a man of peace by Israel and the United States, he made not only anti-Zionist statements, but also more clearly and virulently anti-Semitic statements than anything Ahmadinejad or other Iranian officials have uttered, and that he launched a war that killed thousands of Israelis. Before Israel and the United States enshrined Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas as the partner for peace, he published a book on the secret relationship between Nazism and Zionism, in which he described the Holocaust as the Zionist fantasy, the fanatic lie that 6 million Jews were killed. After Israel and the PLO signed the Oslo Accords in 1993, he said regarding his book, "When I wrote it, we were at war with Israel. Today I would not have made such remarks." The record also shows that the Islamic Republic has not been irrevocably antagonistic towards the United States. Over the past 2 decades, Tehran has consistently cooperated on issues when Washington has requested its assistance, and it has frequently explored the possibility for improved American-Iranian relations. It is the United States that has repeatedly terminated these episodes of bilateral cooperation and rebuffed Iranian overtures, reinforcing Iranian leaders' suspicion that Washington will never accept the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic continues to frame its foreign policy with reference to principles reflecting its religious and revolutionary roots. But for many years, it has defined its diplomatic and national security strategies in largely non-ideological terms, on the basis of national interests that are perfectly legitimate, to be free from the threat of attack and from interference in its internal affairs, to be accepted by neighbors, and the world's most militarily powerful state is Iran's legitimate government. And for more than 20 years, the Islamic Republic has shown itself capable of acting rationally to defend and advance these interests. Americans may not like Tehran's strategic and tactical choices. It's linked to political factions and their associated militias in Afghanistan and Iraq, its support for Hamas and Hezbollah, its pursuit of nuclear fuel cycle capabilities that would also give it a nuclear weapons option. But these choices are far from irrational, particularly in the face of continuing animosity from Washington and a number of regional states. Stereotypes depicting the Islamic Republic as an aggressively radical state are not merely wrong, but worse, dangerous, because they skew Western thinking toward the inevitability of confrontation. In January of 2011, Tony Blair told a British government inquiry into the Iraq War that the Islamic Republic was a looming challenge, quote unquote, negative and destabilizing, that had to be, quote unquote, that had to be confronted and changed, quote unquote. In his call for regime change in Iran, as his earlier call for regime change in Iraq, Blair has been backed by a chorus of neoconservative leaders in the United States, a rising number of U.S. senators and representatives on both sides of the aisle, and a growing body of European elites. Hence the importance of understanding accurately the Islamic Republic's foreign policy and national security strategy. As an astute Iranian strategist once wrote, if the Iranian leadership's actions are perceived as offensive and expansionist, then the rational choice for the United States is to maintain robust deterrence. In contrast, if Iran's policies are defensive, then the irrational choice for the United States is to seek cooperation with Iran and eventually to help integrate Iran into regional politically secure architecture. Into the regional political security architecture. Such integration is certainly inseparable from settling the ongoing nuclear dispute and reaching a broader and much anticipated détente with the United States. It is essential that Washington not misinterpret Iran's actions. It is indeed essential, for if the myth of the Islamic Republic's irrationality is not dispelled, Western perceptions that war with Iran is inevitable will eventually turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is not Trump's war. And the rhetoric that's coming from Democrats is not that, no one was crazy enough to follow Benjamin Netanyahu's directives. This has been a war in the making. Whoever decided to do it was going to fail. And we do not need to have Democrats promote this war when Trump is gone, when this administration is gone. That is the issue. We live in a multipolar world. The project for a new American century is effectively a flop, as it should have been. It's insulting to the rest of the world. Racism is insulting, globally and domestically. And that's really what it boils down to. The religious extremism that Iran is being accused of is right here in the United States, as well as in Israel. When Marco Rubio spews rhetoric that he doesn't even believe himself, because reportedly he was abundantly aware that this war in Iran was a bad idea, quote unquote, he said it's bullshit, it doesn't stop him from standing in front of everyone and saying, well, if only they had invested in their people instead of their military. As he stands in an administration that's at the head of a country, it's representing, allegedly, a country that has no universal health care, no universal higher education, that's dismantling its elementary and secondary education, has a crumbling transportation system, crumbling hospitals, and is victim to the ravages of systemic corruption and the speculative economy and the gross financialization of our economy. All these systems require more pillaging, more war, and more death, which is why they're pushing for them. And the unholy alliance between the defense industry and our government officials, our elected representatives, is a problem. Who has the power to rein it in?